Tel Washington had always found peace in the quiet hours after midnight. The Galactic Heritage Museum transformed into a different world when the last alien tourist left and the lights dimmed to their nighttime setting. His cleaning cart rolled smoothly across the polished marble floors, making that familiar squeaking sound that had become his companion over the years. At 58, Tel had seen enough of life to appreciate simple routines and honest work. The museum housed the most incredible collection of artifacts from across the galaxy. Ancient weapons that could slice through starship hulls, crystalline art pieces that sang when touched by certain species, and technological marvels that Earth scientists still couldn't fully understand. Tel had learned to work around these priceless treasures with the careful respect they deserved, even though he was strictly forbidden from touching anything beyond basic cleaning duties. Earth had joined the Galactic Council just 15 years ago, and humans were still considered newcomers in the vast community of alien civilizations. Most species viewed humans as primitive and underdeveloped, barely worthy of their current provisional citizenship status. Tel didn't mind the attitude much. He'd grown up in Detroit during harder times, and he understood what it meant to work your way up from the bottom. The night shift paid well enough to support his daughter Keisha's education on Mars and send a little extra to his grandson back on Earth. More importantly, working nights meant he rarely had to deal with the condescending looks from alien visitors who seemed surprised that a human was trusted with even basic maintenance work in such an important facility. Tonight started like any other. Tel made his rounds through the Egyptian wing, carefully dusting around authentic pyramid ion stones. He moved through the Rigelian military section, mopping around display cases filled with four-armed battle armor. Each section told the story of a different civilization, most of them thousands of years more advanced than humanity. But as he wheeled his cart toward the newest addition to the museum, something felt different. The air seemed thicker somehow, charged with an energy he couldn't quite identify. The Kepler wing had opened just 3 months ago, dedicated entirely to artifacts from the most mysterious civilization known to galactic history, the progenitors. Nobody knew much about the progenitors except that they had vanished from the galaxy millions of years ago, leaving behind only scattered remnants of their incredible technology. Most alien species spoke of them with a mixture of reverence and fear. Their artifacts were known to behave unpredictably, sometimes activating on their own for reasons no scientist could explain. The centerpiece of the Kepler wing stood in a circular chamber at the end of the corridor. 7 massive stones, each carved from what looked like solid obsidian, arranged in a perfect circle around a raised platform that resembled an altar. The stones were enormous, each one easily as tall as Tel himself and probably weighing several tons. Despite the bright museum lighting, their surfaces seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating an almost unsettling darkness in their immediate area. A brass placard identified them as sacred resonance stones, and explained that they had been discovered on a dead world in the Andromeda sector. The most intriguing part was the warning at the bottom of the description. These stones had never been successfully activated by any known species, despite centuries of study by the galaxy's most brilliant scientists and archaeologists. Tel had always been curious about the stones, but tonight his attention was drawn to something more mundane. As he approached the display area, he noticed a small puddle of water that had formed just inside the protective barrier that kept visitors away from the artifacts. It was probably condensation from the climate control system, nothing unusual in a building this size. Standard museum protocol was clear about situations like this. Any maintenance issue involving restricted artifacts required a formal report to the security office, followed by a wait for a specialized cleaning crew with proper clearance levels. The process usually took hours, sometimes days, depending on how busy the xenoarchaeology department was with their various projects. Tel looked at the small puddle and shook his head. It was barely larger than a coffee stain, sitting harmlessly on the polished floor next to stones that had survived for millions of years. The bureaucratic response seemed ridiculous for such a minor issue. He glanced around the empty hallway, listening for any signs of security patrols. The nearest guard station was 3 corridors away, and he knew from experience that they rarely made rounds through this section before dawn. Making a practical decision that would change the course of human history, Tel carefully stepped over the low barrier that separated visitors from the ancient artifacts. He dipped his mop in the cleaning solution and approached the small puddle with the same methodical care he'd used for thousands of similar tasks over the years. The moment his mop made contact with the floor near the obsidian stones, the universe shifted around him. The stones erupted with a warm, organic light that seemed to come from somewhere deep within their crystalline structure. Deep harmonic vibrations filled the air, starting so low that Tel felt them in his bones before his ears could process the sound. The museum's emergency alarms screamed to life, their piercing wail echoing off the marble walls and filling every corner of the ancient building. Red warning lights began flashing throughout the corridors as automated security systems detected what they classified as an unprecedented energy surge in the Kepler wing. Within seconds, blast shields started descending over the most valuable exhibits, sealing away priceless artifacts from whatever catastrophe the computers believed was unfolding. Tel stood frozen in the center of the chaos, still holding his mop as the 7 obsidian stones pulsed with increasing intensity around him. The light emanating from their surfaces wasn't harsh or blinding like the emergency strobes, but something far more profound. It seemed alive, breathing with its own rhythm, casting dancing shadows that moved independently of any earthly logic. Heavy footsteps thundered down the corridors as the museum's security forces mobilized with military precision. Leading the charge was Security Chief Vorthak, a towering Rigelian whose species had evolved from warrior stock. His 4 powerful arms were already drawing various restraint devices and energy weapons as he rounded the corner into the Kepler wing. Behind him came a squad of guards representing half a dozen different alien species, each armed with their own civilization's most advanced non-lethal capture technology. The security team spread out in practice formation, surrounding the glowing stone circle while maintaining what they hoped was a safe distance. Their weapon targeting systems were going haywire, unable to get clear readings through the energy field that had formed around the ancient artifacts. Some of the guards' communication devices were crackling with static, while others had gone completely dead. Director Ithari arrived moments later, her massive cetacean form undulating with obvious distress as she moved through the corridors using her species' advanced mobility suit. Her universal translator was sparking and crackling, struggling to process the multiple languages being shouted simultaneously by her panicked staff. She had been awakened from deep cycle rest to deal with what her assistant had described as a potential breach of galactic preservation protocols. Human maintenance worker, step away from those artifacts immediately. Vorthak's voice boomed through his suit's amplification system, his words carrying the authority of someone accustomed to instant obedience. His 4 arms gestured emphatically, each hand gripping a different piece of restraint equipment. You are in direct violation of 17 separate galactic preservation statutes and at least 3 interspecies security protocols. But Tel couldn't respond to the commands, couldn't even move his feet. Something far beyond his understanding was happening inside his mind. Images were flashing before his eyes in rapid succession, each one more impossible than the last. He saw star charts mapping regions of space that no human had ever visited. Complex mathematical formulas appeared and disappeared, their meaning just beyond his grasp but somehow familiar. Ancient symbols carved into stone and metal scrolled past his vision, each one seeming to resonate with something deep in his consciousness. The sensation wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming in a way that made his previous understanding of the word seem inadequate. It felt as though someone was downloading the contents of a vast library directly into his brain, but doing so with infinite care to avoid damaging the delicate human neural pathways that were never designed to handle such information. Above the altar where the 7 stones formed their ancient circle, the air itself began to shimmer and distort. What started as barely visible heat waves gradually took on more substance, coalescing into something that defied every law of physics that humanity had discovered. The materialization process was slow and deliberate, as though whatever was appearing was taking great care not to overwhelm the primitive senses and minds observing it. The figure that emerged was unlike anything in the museum's extensive xenobiological databases. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, with proportions that were clearly humanoid but stretched beyond human limits. Its features suggested great age and nobility, carved from what appeared to be translucent crystal that somehow maintained the flexibility of living tissue. When light from the stones passed through its form, it created rainbow patterns that moved independently of the figure's movements. Most unsettling of all, when the entity began to speak, its words completely bypassed their ears and audio recording devices. Instead, the communication went directly into their minds, each listener hearing the message in their own native language and cultural context. The guard's translation equipment remained silent, useless in the face of this direct consciousness-to-consciousness communication method. At last, the figure said, its ancient attention focused entirely on Tel while ignoring the armed security forces surrounding them. The mental voice carried undertones of relief, satisfaction, and something that might have been joy. After so many eons of waiting in the spaces between sleep and death, one has finally come who possesses the ability to hear the true frequency of consciousness itself. Tel found his voice somehow, though speaking felt like trying to shout underwater. The words came from somewhere deeper than his conscious mind, as though the entity's presence had awakened parts of his brain that had been dormant his entire life. "You're one of them," he managed to say, his voice barely audible above the continuing alarm sirens. You're a progenitor. The crystalline being inclined its head in what was unmistakably a gesture of acknowledgement, despite the alien nature of its form. When it responded, Tel could sense layers of meaning beneath the surface words, communications happening at levels his conscious mind couldn't fully process. I am Keeper Velthas, final guardian of this repository of accumulated wisdom, the entity replied. For 3 million of your standard cycles, I have maintained vigil in quantum suspension, waiting for one whose consciousness could properly interface with our legacy systems. The probability calculations suggested this moment might never arrive, yet here you stand. Keeper Velthas turned his crystalline attention fully toward Tel, and the janitor felt as though he were being examined by something infinitely older and wiser than anything he could imagine. The entity's gaze seemed to see past his worn maintenance uniform, past his calloused hands and tired eyes, straight into the core of who he was as a person. Tell me, janitor of the night halls, Velthas said, his mental voice carrying notes of genuine curiosity, what do you understand about your people's true nature in this vast galaxy of advanced civilizations? The question settled into Tel's mind like a stone dropping into still water, creating ripples of thought he couldn't quite control. He found himself answering with honesty that surprised even him, words flowing from some deep place he rarely examined. We're the new kids on the block, Tel replied, his voice growing stronger despite the chaos around them. Humans have barely been in space for a few generations. We've got one little solar system while these other folks have been traveling between stars for thousands of years. Everyone keeps telling us we're primitive, that we need to prove ourselves worthy of even basic citizenship status. He gestured weakly toward the assembled security forces, many of whom were still trying to get their malfunctioning equipment to work properly in the presence of the awakened stones. Look around. These people have technology that seems like magic to us. They've got weapons that could turn our entire planet to dust, ships that can cross the galaxy in days instead of decades. Most of them look at humans like we're barely evolved enough to be trusted with fire. Velthas listened with what appeared to be infinite patience, his translucent form flickering slightly as more information continued to flow between him and the glowing stones. Around them, the security team was growing more agitated as their communications with Central Command became increasingly unreliable. Yet you alone among all the species that have stood in this chamber over the centuries have successfully awakened the resonance stones, the progenitor observed. Brilliant Rigelian scientists have studied these artifacts. Wise cetacean philosophers have meditated beside them for years. Technologically advanced Zephyrian engineers have subjected them to every form of analysis their civilization could devise. None of them could achieve what you accomplished simply by cleaning the floor. The ancient being gestured toward the assembled alien guards with one graceful movement of his crystalline arm. Director Ithari was frantically trying to establish communication with the Galactic Council, while Chief Vorthak was calling for additional backup units and specialized containment equipment. Your people possess something that these other races have lost during their long climb to galactic prominence, Velthas continued. They have forgotten the power of true humility. You still remember what it means to be servants rather than masters of the universe around you. As he spoke, information began surging through Tel's consciousness in waves that were somehow both overwhelming and perfectly manageable. He saw visions of ancient civilizations scattered across the galaxy, each one young and full of potential. He watched as species after species developed their unique gifts, the Rigelians mastering warfare and security, the cetaceans diving deep into philosophy and abstract thought, the Zephyrians pushing the boundaries of technological innovation. But in each vision, Tel could see what Velthas was trying to show him. As these civilizations grew more powerful and specialized, they gradually lost touch with the simple wisdom that had once guided their early development. They became focused on dominance, on proving their superiority over others, on expanding their influence and control. The visions showed him the Shapers, what the progenitors had called themselves, moving among these developing civilizations not as conquerors or rulers, but as gentle guides. They helped each species discover their own unique path without forcing them into predetermined molds. They were gardeners of consciousness, nurturing potential rather than demanding submission. You're saying humans are somehow special? Tel asked, though even as he spoke the words, he sensed that wasn't quite the right way to frame the question. Not special, Velthas corrected gently, his mental voice carrying undertones of ancient wisdom. Prepared. Your species has managed to retain something that others lost millennia ago, the ability to find genuine meaning in simple service, to see the sacred in the mundane tasks that keep civilizations functioning. Outside the museum, Tel could hear the distant rumble of heavy vehicles approaching. The Planetary Defense Force was responding to what they undoubtedly perceived as a major security threat. Military transports were probably surrounding the building, filled with soldiers and specialists who had no context for understanding what was actually happening in the Kepler wing. Every day for nearly 10 years, Velthas continued, you have walked these halls with reverence for things far older and more valuable than yourself. You have cared for artifacts created by civilizations you could barely comprehend, treating each one with the respect it deserved not because you were commanded to do so, but because something in your nature recognized their worth. The 7 stones pulsed with increasing brightness as the progenitor spoke, their light creating patterns on the walls that seemed to shift and dance with meaning just beyond Tel's ability to fully understand. This is why only you could awaken us, Velthas explained. Not because humans are superior to other species, but because your people have not yet lost the fundamental understanding that true strength comes from service to something greater than yourself. The Rigelians fight for dominance. The Cetaceans seek philosophical transcendence. The Zephyrians pursue technological mastery. But humans still remember how to simply care for things that need caring for. The sound of military boots echoed through the outer corridors as specialized forces took positions throughout the museum. Time was running short, and Tel could sense that whatever was happening here was approaching some kind of crucial decision point that would affect far more than just his own life. The museum's main electrical system suddenly failed with a series of loud pops and crackling sounds that echoed through the ancient halls. Emergency backup power kicked in for a few seconds, casting everything in an eerie red glow, before that too flickered and died completely. The only illumination remaining came from the 7 awakened stones, their warm, pulsing light creating dancing shadows on the walls that seemed to move with a life of their own. The time grows short, Velthas said, his crystalline form becoming more solid and defined as the stones channeled increasing amounts of energy through their ancient networks. The quantum resonance field is attracting attention from monitoring stations across 3 star systems. Soon, forces will arrive that view any change to the established order as a threat to be eliminated. The progenitor gestured toward the glowing stones with one graceful movement of his translucent arm. Within these repositories lies the accumulated wisdom of a civilization that guided the galaxy for millions of years. Technologies that could advance your people by millennia, scientific principles that could reshape your understanding of reality itself, knowledge that could unlock abilities your species has never dreamed possible. Tel felt the weight of those words settling into his consciousness like stones dropping into deep water. The information that had been flowing into his mind gave him glimpses of what Velthas meant, starships that could cross galactic distances in moments, medical techniques that could extend human life indefinitely, ways of harnessing energy that made current technology look like children playing with fire. But such power always comes with a price that cannot be avoided or negotiated, the ancient being continued, his mental voice carrying undertones of both warning and sadness. Knowledge changes those who possess it. Wisdom transforms those who truly understand it. The question is whether that transformation leads to growth or corruption. Director Ithari had been struggling with her communication equipment throughout the conversation, but now she surged forward as far as the energy field would allow her massive form to approach. Her universal translator was sparking and smoking, barely functioning as it tried to process the direct mind-to-mind communication happening before her. Human Tel Washington, by the authority of the Galactic Council and 17 different preservation protocols, you will step away from those artifacts immediately, she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to instant obedience from beings across the galaxy. You are currently in violation of sacred site protection laws, xenoarchaeological preservation statutes, and unauthorized contact protocols. Chief Vorthak added his voice to hers, his 4 arms gesturing emphatically as he tried to coordinate his security forces around the expanding energy field. This situation is beyond your authorization level, human. The Galactic Council must be informed of any progenitor contact before any proceedings can continue. This is a matter of universal security that affects every civilization in known space. Velthas turned his ancient attention toward the assembled aliens, and for the first time since his appearance, Tel detected something like pity in the being's expression. The progenitor's crystalline features shifted into what might have been a sad smile as he observed the panic and fear radiating from the security forces. They fear change, as all established powers do when confronted with forces beyond their control, Velthas explained to Tel, his mental voice carrying layers of meaning that spoke to experiences spanning millions of years. Your Galactic Council has spent centuries studying our remnants, trying to unlock our secrets through analysis and force. They seek to add our knowledge to their existing frameworks, never understanding that true wisdom cannot be taken like treasure from a vault. It can only be received by those prepared to be fundamentally transformed by the experience. The sound of heavy vehicles and marching feet was getting closer now, echoing through the museum's corridors as specialized military units took positions throughout the building. Tel could see armed figures moving past the windows, their silhouettes barely visible in the darkness beyond the stone's light. What kind of transformation are we talking about? Tel asked, his voice barely above a whisper as the magnitude of the decision before him began to sink in. What would happen to humanity if I accept this? The stones respond to you because your people still possess the humility to serve without constantly seeking dominion over others, Velthas replied. But power changes all who wield it, even those who begin with the purest intentions. The fundamental question you must answer, not just for yourself, but for all humanity, is whether your species can remain gardeners of consciousness while holding tools that could make you gods among the younger civilizations. Through the shimmering energy field that surrounded them, Tel could see the first contingent of Galactic Council military specialists taking positions in the outer hallways. Their weapons weren't pointed at him, but at the progenitor himself, whose mere presence seemed to be causing fluctuations in their targeting systems and communication networks. If I refuse this offer? Tel asked, though part of him already sensed what the answer would be. Then the stones return to their dormant state, I fade back into the quantum sleep that has sustained me for eons, and your species continues along its current path, Velthas explained with infinite patience. You will slowly earn greater recognition through continued service to others' visions of progress. It is not a failure, Tel Washington. Many species throughout galactic history have chosen the safer path of gradual acceptance rather than the risks of sudden transformation. The ancient being's form flickered slightly, as if maintaining physical presence was becoming increasingly difficult as the confrontation escalated around them. Military spotlights were beginning to shine through the museum windows, casting harsh white beams that seemed unable to penetrate the warm glow surrounding the awakened stones. And if I accept? Tel asked, though he suspected this answer would be far more complex. Then humanity inherits not just our accumulated knowledge, but the responsibility that comes with it, Velthas replied. You become the new gardeners of consciousness, the guides and teachers for civilizations that have yet to emerge from their home worlds. Your maintenance workers' understanding of service becomes the foundation for shepherding entire species through their development toward galactic citizenship. The progenitor's crystalline eyes seemed to look directly through Tel's soul as he delivered the final part of his explanation. But remember this above all else, power corrupts even the humble, given enough time and opportunity. The question that will define your species' future is whether humans can remember the wisdom of the Janitor when they wield the authority of ancients. Tel closed his eyes and felt the weight of the entire galaxy pressing down on his shoulders. In his mind, he saw his daughter Keisha working late in her xenobiology lab on Mars, carefully studying alien plant samples with the same methodical patience he brought to cleaning these museum floors. He thought of his grandson DeAndre, barely 8 years old, playing in the hydroponic gardens of the lunar colonies and asking those wonderfully innocent questions that only children dare to ask about why the stars look different from Earth and whether aliens ever got lonely being so far from home. These weren't abstract concepts anymore. This decision would shape the universe his grandson would inherit, the kind of galaxy where Keisha would raise her own children someday. The responsibility felt overwhelming, but also strangely familiar. It was the same feeling he'd had every night for nearly 10 years, walking through these halls and knowing that priceless treasures from across the galaxy were temporarily in his care. I accept, Tel said quietly, his voice barely audible above the distant sounds of military forces surrounding the museum. Not because I think humans are better than anyone else, and not because we deserve power more than other species. I accept because someone needs to remember that all wisdom starts with knowing how to serve something bigger than yourself. The moment those words left his lips, the 7 obsidian stones erupted with light so brilliant that it should have been blinding. But instead of harsh illumination, the radiance felt warm and welcoming, like sunlight filtering through stained glass windows in the small church where Tel had learned about service as a child. The light flowed over him and through him, carrying with it knowledge that had been waiting millions of years for someone humble enough to receive it properly. Information poured into Tel's consciousness, but not like water rushing through a broken dam. Instead, it came like a gentle tide, each wave of understanding building naturally on the last. Technologies that could reshape matter at the molecular level, scientific principles that revealed the hidden connections between all forms of consciousness, mathematical concepts that described how civilizations could grow without destroying themselves or others. Every night he had spent walking these halls with careful respect, treating artifacts from alien civilizations as treasures worthy of protection rather than resources to be exploited, had been preparation for this moment. His mind had been unknowingly trained through years of meditation disguised as simple maintenance work. The progenitors had designed their test not to identify the most brilliant or powerful minds, but to find someone whose spirit had been shaped by service. "It is done," Velthus said, his crystalline form beginning to fade as the transfer of knowledge reached completion. The ancient being's voice carried notes of profound satisfaction, as though a burden carried for millions of years was finally being lifted from his shoulders. "Remember this above all else, young gardener, true power is never about what you can take from others, but about what you can give to help them grow." As the last traces of the progenitor's consciousness merged permanently with the stones, Tell felt the ripple effects of his choice spreading outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. The knowledge flowing through his mind didn't make him feel superior or different from other humans. Instead, it filled him with an even deeper appreciation for the simple act of caring for things beyond himself. The stones gradually dimmed from their brilliant eruption to a steady, warm glow that felt alive and responsive. The emergency alarms finally stopped wailing, leaving the museum in a silence that felt pregnant with possibility. The security forces outside maintained their positions, but their communication equipment was working again, and the immediate sense of crisis was fading. Director Ithari was the first to approach cautiously, her massive form moving carefully across the marble floor as her sensors tried to make sense of the readings they were detecting from the stone circle. Her universal translator was functioning properly again, and her voice carried a mixture of awe, fear, and professional curiosity. "Human Tell Washington," she said formally, using his full name as protocol required in situations involving first contact with unknown civilizations. "What has transpired here? Our instruments detected energy signatures unlike anything in our databases, and the quantum resonance patterns suggest fundamental changes to local spacetime." Tell bent down and picked up his mop from where he had dropped it when the stones first activated. He looked at the simple cleaning tool thoughtfully, understanding now that it represented something far more significant than he had ever imagined. Every mundane task, every night spent maintaining these halls, had been part of a larger pattern that connected him to civilizations across the galaxy. "Something ended, and something else began," he replied, his voice carrying new depths of meaning while remaining fundamentally unchanged. "The progenitors left us more than just artifacts and ancient technology. They left us a job that needs doing, and I'm going to need help learning how to do it right." In the days and weeks that followed, Tell continued working his regular night shift at the museum. The difference was that now he cleaned those halls with the accumulated wisdom of an ancient civilization flowing quietly through his consciousness. The knowledge didn't make his work feel less important or meaningful. Instead, it helped him understand that the simple act of maintaining and caring for things was one of the most powerful forces in the universe. The stones remained active, but they responded now to intention rather than mere proximity. When scientists and researchers from various species came to study them, seeking to unlock their secrets through traditional analysis and technological force, the stones remained silent and dark. But when those same individuals approached with genuine humility and a sincere willingness to serve something greater than their own advancement, the stones would sing with harmonious light. Humanity's status in the Galactic Council changed overnight, but the transformation happened in exactly the right direction. Rather than demanding recognition or special privileges based on their new connection to progenitor technology, humans began serving as mediators and guides. They helped other species rediscover their own capacity for growth and wonder, using the janitor's wisdom as the foundation for a new kind of galactic civilization built on service rather than domination. And in the quiet hours of the night shift, when the museum halls were empty except for the soft sound of wheels squeaking and floors being lovingly maintained, Tell Washington continued to practice the ancient art of caring for things beyond himself, knowing that this simple service was the most powerful force in the universe.